continuing with our series tonight of redefining quiet time. And in that series, we're looking at the different ways that God has designed us to connect to Him. Gary Thomas, he wrote a book called Sacred Pathways. And Gary Thomas, what he did was he noticed that Christians tended to be stuck in a rut. So he raised the question. He said, since God has intentionally made us different, why should everyone be expected to love and worship God the same way? And Gary did some research on this. In his research, he discovered that God designed Christians to have many different pathways to enjoy intimacy with Him. In his book, Sacred Pathway, Gary defined 9 ways to draw people near to God. And so far, over the last couple of weeks, we looked at 2 of them. We looked at the naturalist. Now, I got some props here just to help us remember what they are. The naturalist, all right? So the naturalist, they love everything that goes out in nature. They love spending time with nature. That's how they connect to God. So here's the naturalist. I'm going to put them right there. Now, the other group that we looked at about 2 weeks ago, we looked at the sensates. The sensates, they connect to God through the different senses, through smell, through sight. So this is going to represent the sensates that we talked about. And where is it? So they like sight, smell, and touch. And so I brought some of my cologne here. So this is going to represent the sensates. So right there. All right. So we looked at those 2 over the last couple weeks. Well, we have a couple more ahead of us. So tonight what we're going to do is we're going to look at 3 more. We're going to look at 3 more of these pathways or avenues that people can use to get to God. We're going to look at what are called the traditionalists. We're going to look at ascetics, and then we're going to look at activists. And the next week, Shaggy's going to come back. Shaggy's going to come back, and he's going to do the final 4. He's going to cover the caregivers, the enthusiasts, the contemplatives, and the intellectuals, or as I like to call them, the nerds. I'm allowed to call them that because I have labeled myself as one. Understand in this specific way that God designed us to connect with Him, it's critical if we ever want to grow in Him and understand His heart. Gary Thomas, he asked the question. He said, why should everyone be expected to worship God the same way? Why do we assume that the God who invented all the varieties of flowers out there and all the different colors and shapes and smells of the flowers, and the God that invented all the different species of animals, the different sizes and shapes and smells, and the God who created all those weird little sea creatures that are way down in the deep part of the oceans that people are still discovering today, why do we assume that that God of creativity has only wants us to have a one-size-fits-all approach to worshiping Him? Why do we assume that the only way that we connect to God through Him is maybe only through songs on a Sunday morning or Sunday night? While that's one way, that's not the only way. If that's the only way that we view God and having intimacy with God, if that's the only way we can think about connecting with God, then we're going to be missing out. We're going to be robbing ourselves, and we're going to be robbing God of a much deeper relationship that we could have with Him. The same God that designed the flowers and the plants and the animals and the weird little sea creatures, that same God, He designed you too. He poured that same diversity into us that He gave to the rest of creation. And because He did that, because He created us so unique, we need to discover the way that He designed us to connect with Him. And that's why this series is so important. Because if you miss this avenue with God, then you're never going to have that deep connection with God that we all desire. This is about discovering the way that God uniquely designed you so that you could worship Him with genuineness and authenticity. When we discover that, then God, He's going to have all of us. He's going to have our whole being. When we worship Him through that pathway that He designed us to have uniquely, we're going to be connected with Him on a much deeper level. When we genuinely connect with God, we draw into a deeper relationship with Him. We're drawn into a journey that takes us into the very presence of God so that we're changed. We're changed into His likeness, changed into the person that He wants us to be. We're changed, and we're going to end up loving the things that God loves, and we're going to end up hating the things that God hates. Now you might be thinking, well, I don't want to be changed. I like who I am. I like the way I am. But until you start on that journey to being changed, you're never fully going to experience the level of God activity in your life that he has for you. But when we connect with God through the different ways that he's designed for us, we're going to understand what the heart of God is like. Psalms 37:1 says, "Delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." He's going to give you the desires of your heart because when we regularly connect with him, we become more in tune with what he wants for our lives. See, and then our heart's desires become more like what his heart's desires are for us. If you want to see a new level of God activity in your life, then your heart needs to be in line with him. When we get in line with God, he's going to become your personal guide through life. He's going to guide you. He's going to give you the wisdom to answer life's big questions. He's going to give you the wisdom to answer questions like, what does he want me to do for my job? Or questions like, how far is too far? If you know what I mean. Who does he want me to marry? Where does he want me to live? How does God want me to respond to this emotional situation? What does he want me to say yes to, and what does he want me to say no to? The different pathways to connect to God that we've studied so far, plus the ones that we're going to study tonight and next week, they all give us an opportunity and freedom to make connecting with God more effective. When we know them, and when we choose to do them, when we choose those different pathways that God designed for us, you're going to begin to see times in your prayer life absolutely explode to a new level of conversation with God. So let's jump into tonight's pathways. And if you see any of these pathways that are designed for you, grab hold of it. Start applying it in your life, and it's going to draw you into that relationship with God. The first one we're going to look at tonight is the traditionalist. The traditionalist is just like the name implies. These people love structure, and they love tradition in the church. The traditionalists, they connect to God three different ways. They connect through rituals, symbols, and they connect through sacrifice. Now, when they connect to God through rituals, they're the ones who go into the churches and they repeat the liturgy back that's read to them, and they absolutely love it. They love doing that. They connect to God by singing psalms back to him. The traditionalist is the person who prays the Lord's Prayer, and they actually mean it when they pray it, not just reciting it over and over again. They do things out of absolute true reverence for God. Now, while others may do things basically out of a sense of duty or superstition, others who are not a traditionalist. I had a friend, he was a Catholic, and we used to drive around together. This guy never went to church, and his life was an absolute mess because he was into so many illegal things I lost count. He did not live his life for God at all. But every time we drove past a cemetery or a church, he would do the cross. And he did that because he felt that if he didn't do that, that God is going to curse him. So he did that out of a sense of superstition. It was really, really empty superstition that he did it for. He wasn't connecting to God out of reverence. But when a traditionalist does a ritual, they do it because they're aware that God is right there. And they're showing the respect and reverence to God that he deserves. The traditionalist connects through rituals. I got my prop here, and this is going to represent a traditionalist. This is a book of prayers that they would absolutely love and read back. So we'll put that one right here. I can't see it, but it's down there. The traditionalist connects through rituals. They also connect through symbols. The traditionalist connects better with God when there are symbols around because the symbols remind the traditionalist of something. The symbols are going to trigger something in the traditionalist mind, something maybe to pray for. And a couple years ago, Ryan and I, we went to Europe. We went to Germany. We went to Italy. We went to huge cathedrals there, and they have these gigantic stained glass windows, and the light would just pour through those windows. Well, while the sensate, the person who connects to God through their senses, would look at that window, and they would be absolutely drawn in by the colors and the light coming through. The ascetic, they're going to look at that window, and they're going to see the picture. And they're going to see maybe Christ hanging on a cross, and that's going to trigger their mind and let them be thankful to God and drawn into him closer because of what the picture represents. The traditionalists, they connect to God through rituals, symbols, and lastly, through sacrifice. I think of monks when I think of sacrifice. These monks that are located high up in the mountains somewhere in a solitary place, they deny themselves of something that they want. I mean, monks, They deny themselves so that they can grow closer to God and be reminded that they serve God and not the other way around. The traditionalist is the kind of person that looks forward to fasting. They draw close to God when they deny themselves something that they want. They sacrifice for God. Now, here's a word of caution for the traditionalist. If you're not careful, you can make rituals and sacrifice something that you do because that's the way it's always been done. You can begin to lose the meaning behind the rituals and just start doing it out of tradition. Like, for example, there was a guru. This is a true story. There was a guru in a temple. Well, the guru, he sat down to worship each evening, and his cat would get in the way and would distract the worshipers. So he ordered that the cat, during the service, that the cat be tied up so that it wouldn't distract the worshipers. First of all, figure, how do you tie a cat up? But they would tie this cat up so that it wouldn't get in the way of the worshipers. Well, over time, the guru died. But they still continued to tie the cat up. Well, then the cat died. So they got another cat. And they brought it into the temple and they tied the cat up. And then the guru's disciples, they wrote these laws down and they wrote these things down in their discourses. And they wrote on the essentials of the role of a cat in properly conducted worship. They completely lost the focus of why they tied the cat up in the first place. They tied it up in the first place because of the pain in the neck. But then the cat dies, they get another cat, they replace it, and they do the same thing. They did it out of tradition, out of meaningless tradition. The traditionalists, they always need to remind themselves of why they're doing something so they don't fall in that trap of empty, meaningless traditions. Now, if you think you're a traditionalist, here's some things you could do. Here's some things that might help you connect on a deeper level with God. Get a book of liturgy and read it every day, or a book of prayers like the one I have down here. Create a ritual to go through when you pray. Connect to God that way. Put symbols around your house so that when you're walking down and you see a symbol, it'll remind you to pray for something specific. Set aside time for a fast, maybe once a week, once a month. Set aside that time for fast. Lent is coming up. Observe Lent. Abstain from something during that period of time. And if you're a traditionalist, that's going to draw you closer to God. If you're a traditionalist, putting these things in place, it's going to bring you into a deeper connection to God. All right, so that's a traditionalist. The second pathway to God that we're looking at tonight are the ascetics. I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't know what the word ascetics means, so I looked it up online. An ascetic, here's what the definition I found. An ascetic person is one who is austere in appearance, manner, or attitude. It didn't help me very much. I had to look up the word austere. And then so on, and so on, and so on. So here's the ultimate definition that I came with for ascetic. The ascetic person is someone who lives a lifestyle that is characterized by abstinence from various sorts of worldly pleasures, often with the aim of pursuing religious and spiritual goals. Pretty much, you're not going to find an ascetic in a nightclub. All right? This is what I have for the ascetics. These are the people that like things very plain. This is what I have for the ascetics here. That's our prop for the ascetics. 3 words that describe the ascetic person: solitude, simplicity, and separateness. And if those words make you cringe, then you're probably not an ascetic person. But if you like times alone, if you like to get away from noise and busyness of life, this may be who you are. The ascetic, they love the times alone. These are the people that actually connect through God through truly quiet time. They connect with God through solitude. They like to get away. They like to go to retreat centers and just get away from the phones ringing and the people knocking on their doors and the people bugging them. In the Bible, we read about John the Baptist. He lived out in the wilderness. I mean, he was probably an ascetic. You see Jesus oftentimes retreating from the crowds and going away to a quiet, solitary place just to pray, just to get alone with God. I have a friend, he's a worship leader, and he actually wanted to get away for a couple days, and he wanted to seek God's direction in his life. So he contacted a retreat center that was closed down for the season, and he rented one of the cabins for 3 days. No television, no phone, nothing. And he went there, and he just prayed and was alone with God for 3 days because that's the way that he connected with God. That, to me, sounds like he's an ascetic. The ascetics, they need solitude, and they need also simplicity. For the ascetic, the less distractions, the better. They like plain and simple. Sheggs, a couple weeks ago, he talked about how the sensates connect to God through their senses. You know, if you went into their prayer room, they would probably have like candles burning, and they'd have all different colors on the walls, and probably a big comfy couch. Well, if you went into an ascetic's prayer room, a prayer room, you're probably going to find you're going to say that the place is like very sterile. You know, very bare bones environment, white walls, no fancy furniture, probably no candles burning, no distractions, just them and God. That's the ascetic. They like solitude, simplicity, and lastly, they like to be separate. Again, I think of the monks. I mean, these dudes, they're about as separate as it gets. They're up there on a mountaintop somewhere. They're in a monastery. They're separated from the rest of the world. I also think of the Amish people, you know, down in Lancaster. They're actually separate as well. They remove themselves from the rest of the world because they want to focus on God through simplicity. I have a friend, he falls under this category. His name is Mark, and he has elected not to have a television in his house. Not to have any television at all, because he feels that it brings a level of busyness into his life that he doesn't want to have, that would detract him away from God. So the ascetics, they like solitude, simplicity. They also like separateness. Now here's a word of caution for that person. You can't be a total loner. You can't be a hermit and retreat from the rest of the world. God in his word, he says to love him, but he also tells us to love other people, and he tells us to come together regularly for corporate worship. So you can't just retreat and then just be alone all the time. You're going to crave those alone times, and you have to make a conscious effort to engage in other lives too. God didn't give you this pathway to be selfish. He gave you this pathway so that you can retreat at those times and recharge your batteries, so to speak, in those quiet times. And then come back together again and serve other people after your batteries are recharged, just like Jesus did. Now here's a few suggestions for you if you fall under this category. If you're an ascetic, you should plan to spend time with God, either early in the morning or late at night, when the phones aren't going to be ringing, when nobody's going to be pounding on your door or demanding things of you. Also, here's something else you could do. Turn off all your electronics for a while. I know that sounds like really scary. Your computer, your cell phone, everything. Turn it off. If you're an ascetic, that's going to work for you. See, we live in a world that runs 100 miles an hour, and it's hitting our senses all the time. You're constantly being fed with different things. If you're an ascetic and you don't power down once in a while, you're going to be starving yourself spiritually. So power down once in a while. Spend that time alone with God. And then turn everything back on. It'll still be there. Also, maybe plan to get away like my friend did for a silent retreat. Maybe it's just taking a tent and going back in the woods and camping for a little while. Just you and God. Just some alone time. Now, like we said, the ascetic, he craves solitude, simplicity, and separateness. Our last group, they're really the opposite. They're the activists. Okay, now I didn't have to look this word up. I know what it means. I know what an activist is. But to be honest, I didn't figure an activist was one of the ways to connect with God until I really started looking into it. When I think of an activist, I think of the angry guy with the cops in the riot gear running at him, with the nightsticks out. That's what I think of an activist. But that's not really what a godly activist is. The Christian activist is someone who connects with God by standing up for injustice in the church or injustice in society in general. He or she's, if they see something wrong, they're going to address it. So for my prop for the activist, I got some combat boots. Because that's about as close as I could. Well, they're not actually combat boots, but that's about as close as I get to combat boots. Well, most people, they just want to get along with each other. They want to leave a good impression with each other. The activist really doesn't care what you think about them. The activist is more interested in getting results for the cause that they're fighting for. They're not looking to really make friends. The activist is going to see a situation. They're going to ask themselves, why am I the only one that sees this and the only one who's willing to do something about it? The activist is unshy about confronting people when they see something that's wrong. Oftentimes, the activists, they're going to be the ones to convince and motivate others to join their cause. I have a friend who is the president of the Warren County Right to Life. That's an organization that encourages mothers not to get an abortion. And she works and she defends these unborn babies, and quite honestly, she really does not care what anybody thinks about her, because she has a mission to do, and she focuses on that mission because she knows that helping these moms and defending these babies is what God wants her to do. The activists, they draw close to God when they're standing up against injustice. They're connected to God that way because they know that God himself doesn't like injustice. A word of caution here for the activists in the room. Be careful not to look down at others because they're not as forward as addressing the issues and situations as you are. God, he designed us all differently, and he designed you with that unique pathway. But don't look down at others because they're not designed that way. Also, for the activists, make an effort to love others. Oftentimes, the cause can overshadow the reason why you're doing it in the first place. God calls us to love each other. He even calls us to love our enemies. In your activism, remember that you're representing God. Your behavior may be the only glimpse of God's nature that other people are going to see. So behave in a way that is worthy of that. Conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the calling. No shooting abortion doctors. No violence. And for the activists, here's a few suggestions for you. A few things that you can pursue. Support a political candidate with biblical values. Volunteer for their campaign. Volunteer for a Christian organization somewhere. Go over to County College and start some open-air preaching that is not freaky. I guarantee you're going to draw a crowd if you do that. And since you're an activist, you don't care what anybody thinks about you, you're going to get some opinions coming back at you. But go do that. Hey, post a video on YouTube that stands up for some injustice that you're passionate about seeing justice done in. As an activist, you have a certain influence over others. Use that influence wisely. Keep a perspective on why you're doing it. Tonight, we looked at 3 pathways that Christians use to connect to God: the traditionalist, the ascetic, and the activist. Next week, we're going to be wrapping up with the final 4. Remember, these are ways that God has designed each one of us to draw close to him. Hopefully in that, you're able to connect with the one that you are so that you can have a deeper relationship with God. There's something else we could do with this information. We can use it as a tool to witness effectively to others. When you understand these different avenues, you can use it, you can pinpoint your friend's avenue and specifically tailor witnessing to your friends. For example, if you have a friend who you suspect is an ascetic, he likes solitude and simplicity, you're probably not going to want to bring him to a mega church with a rock and worship band. Probably better off just going to a little country church, quiet, out of the way. That's going to speak to them. Same turn, if you have a friend who is a non-naturalist, if he doesn't like going out to nature and you drag him out into nature and he's scared of the spiders and the snakes and everything else, and you're like, can you feel the presence of the Lord? That's not going to work for him. So be aware of what your friend's needs are too if you're trying to witness to them. I want to encourage you, take this information. Use it to bring yourself and to bring others into a closer relationship with God. When we do that, when we walk into a relationship with God, into a deeper relationship with God, it is then that he's going to give you the desires of your heart.